Thank you for listening to Life Improvement Radio. You are listening to a rebroadcast of a previously recorded show.
Let's talk about life. Let's have a real conversation. Let's talk about life. Better learn a little information. Let's talk about life.
Well, hi, let's talk about life. How you doing? Good morning. It's Beverly Harity broadcasting from beautiful St. Petersburg, Florida. I'm very, very, very excited about this show. I've been percolating on misogyny and all the variations of it for many years. And since everything has happened and we're all being overwhelmed with these incredible examples, you know, even if you recall people on my Facebook page, I started to wonder about misogynistic women. And in my research, there's an amazing amount of them. So that's a whole nother show. But since I decided to do this, and Eric was my producer from Life Improvement Radio, was willing to, help me at the last minute put this show together. It's going to be basically an overview on misogyny, discrimination. I've got so many, I can't tell you. Repression, misogyny in the hip-hop culture, an overview of Thelma and Louise, 1991 award-winning film, an analysis of My Last Duchess, Robert Browning, and this amazing thing I ran across last night about a female artist named Jenna Leschi. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing it right, but she was a student of Caravaggio, and she does these amazing paintings. She was a rape victim. It's an amazing story. It's worth an hour in and of itself. So we have art, we have culture, we've got hip hop, we've got poetry, and there's even a section of misogyny on the internet. So this is going to me, I was fascinated. I spent a lot of time reading, researching, editing. Each category is a book, a 2-hour show. I mean, we could go on forever on this. But I did want this show to be sort of an informative overview. And everything I'm going to share with you has been researched. It's been footnoted. I'll have some opinions, and I'll let you know what those are. I'll say in my opinion or in my. But this is basically a review of the research out there on these particular subjects. So I'm going to start by just talking about misogyny. How it's defined. It's the hatred of, contempt for, or prejudice against women or girls. It could be manifested in a number of ways, including social exclusion, sex discrimination, hostility, androcenism, which I don't even know what that is, but I'll figure it out. Something to do with men, patriarchy, the ideal of male privilege, belittling of women, violence against women, sexual objectification. It can be found within ancient texts relating to mythology, Western philosophy, and many, many thinkers have been identified clearly as misogynistic. I was laughing because Schopenhauer was so outrageously misogynistic. I'm going to later on quote some of his statements. It's hard not to laugh at them. They're so outrageous. But then I realized the poem by Robert Browning, My Last Duchess, Schopenhauer could have written it had he been a poet. So anyway, let's go on. It's formally defined as a central part of sexist precedents and ideology, and as such is an important basis for the oppression of females in a male-dominated society. Misogyny is manifested in many different ways, from jokes to pornography to violence to the self-contempt women may feel towards their own body. And I started thinking, now this is my opinion, my thoughts. I started thinking about all the women who hate Hillary Clinton. They hate her. They hate her unreasonably. They don't know her. They're avid Trump supporters. And I started thinking about this self-loathing. I also been thinking a lot about the mother complex and how the split can be between the good mother and the bad mother, which is a whole nother show too. But there's something going on with these women who adore Trump in a blindly, no matter what he does, and hate Clinton blindly. And there's something very significant about that as to the woman's own self-perception. This, I believe, as a matter of fact, if I really wanted to put a lot of time in, I could prove it. But I'm not here to prove this. I'm here to share what has already been proven. But women need to start looking at their hatred. And the quotes are all over the place, by the way, about women hating women. I thought, oh my God, what's going on with all of this hate? It's actually depressing. Okay, so sociologist Michael Flood. He notes that most common in men, misogyny also exists, and in practice by women against other women, even themselves. Misogyny functions as a belief system that accompanies patriarchal or male-dominant societies for thousands and thousands of years. Aristotle contended that women existed as natural deformities of imperfect males. I tell you, I got reading all the research I did last night and this morning was, it's such a hard wire. It goes back to the Stone Age. It is such a hard wire that, in my opinion, I don't think it will ever be overcome. It's like racism. I think it might get less dominant and less prevalent and less intense, but I don't think it's ever going to go away, because not only in our culture, we've admittedly been sort of isolated and sitting on top of the world. Now that we're a part of the global community, it's like going back to the Stone Age in many cultures. We'll talk about that too. So here we are. The earliest edited passage came from a tract called On Marriage, and it was from a philosopher who was talking about morality. It's the earliest known commentary on this is 150 BC. And this is where a lot of the philosophy, a lot of the learning, a lot of preparing men and boys in education began with these original philosophers, and what they said was taken as truth and was handed down and became a hard wire. As a matter of fact, I'm comfortable saying at this point it's in our genetic code. Aristotle wrote that women were inferior to men. He says that the courage of a man lies in commanding, and a woman lies in obeying. Now, I'm going to tie this into hip-hop later, because everything I read about, there's a lot about hip-hop and misogyny, too, that's throwing us back to the Stone Age in a lot of ways. So it's this perpetuation that men are dominant, women are submissive, passive, and you better keep them in line. That's another thing. You're not a man if you can't keep a woman subjugated. So that's throughout all these writings. Misogyny is stated as a disease in Greek literature. It's an antisocial position. It ran contrary to the possession. These points are widely known in secondary literature. So secondary literature who began to analyze primary literature they see that women are the wives and family of the family and the foundation of society. However, it's constantly perpetuated that you've got to keep them in line. We used to joke, oh, keep her barefoot and pregnant. This goes so far back and is so hardwired and is so embedded in our genetic code. I'm convinced that, women just better, oh, well, never mind, I won't go there. In religion, the god Zeus, this is ancient Greek, the god Zeus became infuriated and decided to punish humankind with an evil thing for their delight. And the evil thing is Pandora, the first woman. So Pandora is the mythic version of the wife who causes trouble, who makes trouble. She is sent by the god Zeus to man to, screw with his head. It's part of the curse of man is that he hates and desires women at the same time. This is all part of ancient Greek religion. Now, Buddhism seems to be the only religion that I've ran across in my research on this particular subject that seems to be pretty cool about this. There's rare or very rare any commentary on Buddhism on misogyny. Wait till we get to Christianity. Oh my God. The foundation of early Christian misogyny is guilt about sex, its insistence on female subjugation, and its dread of female seduction. And these are all from St. Paul's epistles. The legacy of Christian misogyny was consolidated by the so-called fathers of the church, who thought a woman was not only the gateway of the devil, but also a temple built over a sewer, and that's a direct quote. There's arguments and debates about this. I could go on and on for the rest of the hour about this. But there's authors that have written counter theory. I would suggest that you just Google all of this and, study it for yourself if you're really interested. Feminist literary studies by somebody named Ruthven. There's all these different resources that are just overwhelming. And I only had so much time. So there's a debate, but we all know that Christians may revere, the Mother Mary, but she better stay in the kitchen, or so to speak. Islam. In the verse in the Quran that women plug into, I'll read it to you. Men are the maintainers of women because Allah has made some of them to excel others, and because they spend out of their property. The good women are therefore obedient, guarding the unseen as Allah has guarding the unseen. Oh. And then there's the women whose part you fear desertion. Admonish them, leave them alone in their sleeping places, and beat them. Then if they obey you, do not seek a way to beat them again. In other words, keep beating them until they're totally obedient. In his book, Popular Islam and Misogyny, a case study of Bangladesh, he does a lot of research on this. I couldn't repeat all of it. Islam is synonymous, known as a promoter of misogyny in its worst form. Now, of course, we're talking about, murder. The great traditions of Islam regard women and the Quran, and they spoke about, there's an argument there, but it's weak. It's weak because the Quran is like the Bible. I mean, that's the word. There's another author who researchers said corn has been the exclusive domain of Muslim men, and that's why it's written with this heavy masculine dominant hand. Sikhism is fine. There's no way misogynistic in any of its writings. Scientology has a problem. In the book A New Slant on Life, Ron Hubbard writes, a society in which women are taught anything but the management of a family and the care of men and the creation of future generations is a society which is on its way out. In other words, not good. He also writes the historian can peg the point where society begins its sharpest decline, and it's at the instant where women begin to take part on an equal footing with men. In politics, business affairs, since this means the men are decadent and the women are no longer women. Now, this is Scientology. Now, there's philosophers and thinkers, and I already mentioned Aristotle. He believes that women were inferior. We mentioned that. The one that really struck me, because I remember reading him, philosophy was one of my minors in college. Equal rights for women is always justify the burdens you impose upon girls, but oppose them anyway. They must be thwarted from an early age. They must be exercised to constrain so that it costs them nothing to stifle all their fantasies and to submit their will to others. That's pretty intense. That's Rousseau. Charles Darwin often wrote that the females were inferior through the lens of evolution. That was his opinion. That's a big, long treaty, too, which I don't have time to read. Schopenhauer really took the cake, though. He said that Schopenhauer's argument that women's only role in nature is to further the species through childbirth, and hence is equipped with the power to seduce and capture men. He goes on to state that women's cheerfulness is chaotic and disruptive, which is why it's crucial to exercise obedience to those women. For her to function beyond her rational behavior is a threat against men, as well as other women, he notes. Schopenhauer also thought women's cheerfulness is an expression of her lack of morality. Now, My Last Duchess, I might as well go there right now because My Last Duchess is all about, it's a poem where the author is Browning, Robert Browning, but it's a poem is sort of a monologue. And this Duke has a visitor to his home, and there's a portrait there, but it's got a velvet curtain over it. So the visitor says, well, and the Duke is very proud of all his stuff, and he's showing off all his stuff. And the visitor says, hey, what's behind the curtain? And he tells, oh, that's my last Duchess. It's quite a long poem. I'll read the section of why she was his last Duchess. It's clear that he had her murdered. And this is what he says. And this ties into Schopenhauer. She had a heart, how shall I say, too soon made glad, too easily impressed. She liked whatever she looked on, and her looks went everywhere. 'Twas all but one. My favor at her breast, the dropping of the day in the west, the bough of the cherries, some officious fool broke into the orchard for her, the white mule she rode around on the terrace, all and each would draw from her alike the approving speech or blush. She thanked men, good, but thanked them somehow, I know not how, as if she ranked my gift of a 900-year-old name with just anybody's gift. So that's My Last Duchess, and so Arthur Schopenhauer Robert Browning, by the way, didn't hold these feelings. He was commentating an Italian Renaissance where there was supposed to be a new humanism. And he wanted to explore issue and morality in the Victorian period and the moral pundits, and this poem was sort of dedicated to that Italian Renaissance. Consciousness, self-representation, but it's clear the Duke is totally ticked off that his Duchess was able to smile and be pleased with anything but him. You know, if she didn't devote him completely, if she dared even smile at a bowl of cherries, it offended him personally. So we have, you know, a total narcissist and clearly a misogynist in the Duke. So I wanted to bring that poem in at the right time. So that's the end of that poem. But anyway, Schopenhauer goes on to say that women have never been able to produce a single great, genuine, and original achievement in the fine arts. Well, they weren't allowed to read. They weren't allowed to paint. They were totally subjugated and oppressed. He even blames women for the fall of King Louis XIII and triggering the French Revolution. At all events, a false position of the female sex, a symptom of an Our Lady business, is a fundamental defect of the state of society. And it's bound to be noxious and influence all parts. He writes an essay on women in which he expresses his opposition to what he calls Teutonic Christian stupidity on female affairs. He argues that women are meant by nature to obey, and they are childish, frivolous, and short-sighted, just like my last Duchess, right? He claimed that no women had ever produced, I went over there, but by the way, that's been disproven by the last artist I'm going to present to you today. So we're going to leave Schopenhauer. Nietzsche. Here's his quote. In Badon, Good and Evil, Friedrich Nietzsche states that the stricter controls on women was a condition of every elevation of culture. Nobody in all these old writings and philosophies and research, nobody has ever said an education of women, an elevation of women. Every single one is about oppression, subjugation, devaluing, diminishing, controlling. It's really crazy to me. Hey, what were they afraid of? Hegel. Women are capable of education, but they are not made for activities which demand universal faculties. Wow. By the way, there is a whole section I read on, and it's going to come up on feminism, I believe, where men are really terrified of women. Women are too powerful for them, and they have to oppress them and subjugate them because they're afraid of them. And of course, the only way to do that is by physical force, power, control, beating, subjugating. Oh. Internet misogyny. Misogynistic rhetoric is prevalent online and has grown rhetorically more aggressive. The public debate over gender-based attacks has increased significantly, leading to calls for policy interventions and better responses by social networks like Facebook and Twitter. However, a 2016 study conducted by the think tank Demos concluded that 50% of all misogynic tweets on Twitter come from women. You have to think about that. 50% of all the misogynistic tweets on Twitter come from women. Now, we already know, at least I know on Facebook, I was speculating like 2-3 weeks ago on women being misogynistic. It never occurred to me that they actually were. I knew that women self-loathe. I knew they have mother complexes. I knew a lot of things about women. I'm a woman. I have 4 daughters. I have many friends. Half my clients were women. Half my clients were men. I have a pretty good idea of how that works psychologically. But it seems to be intensified lately. It seems to be Clinton running for president has seemed to push all kinds of buttons, especially for women. And I urge you, if you hate her, remember, you don't even know her. If you hate her and loathe her, then you need to look at your mother complex, or you need to look at self-loathing, because there's no other explanation for this. There just isn't. I mean, you can't hate and loathe somebody with that level of passion and hatred that you don't even know. It's clearly a flashback. It's clearly a button. It's clearly a complex. We call complexes buttons. Oh, she pushed her. He pushed my button. That's a complex. A complex brings out these intense feelings. And you need to help yourself. Help yourself. Because you know what? We all have parental introjects. And if you hate women and hate mothers and hate powerful women, you're going to hate yourself and you're going to never be powerful. You're never going to be the master of your own fate. And by powerful, I mean in charge of your life. This is really, really, really important. Here's what else they say about internet misogyny. Most targets are women who are visible in the public sphere, women who speak out about the threats they've received, and women who are perceived to be associated with feminism and feminist gains. Oh, I remember feminism. I'd love to have $1 for every guy who called me lesbian, because I was a feminist. I mean, you know, the attack on sexuality. Where else can a guy go? If he hits a woman, well, I don't know about anymore, but if she registers a complaint, he can get arrested. But it's easier to call a woman a lesbian if she feels she has rights. And I've heard that word a lot. Authors of misogynistic messages are usually anonymous or otherwise difficult to identify. You know, I was going to tell you something there. It's so obvious on Facebook. I almost started a Facebook page called Misogynistic Postings, because I don't think in the heat of the passion about what's going on in our world today, people even stop and think about, hey, this is a misogynistic post. I'd better not do it, or I better rethink this, or they're outrageous. I'm laughing at the outrageous positions people are taking that are not reality-based. And this is honestly what concerns me the most. They're not reality-based. They've got to be triggers. They've got to be complexes. There's no other explanation. It's just crazy. But anyway, he goes on and says, the rhetoric involves sexual violence. When the misogynist post, it's always about being some sort of violence or some sort of aggression or some sort of overpowering or power and control trip. And I'll tell you, I learned in social work school and following at the Jung Institute and all the different, I mean, I've been in like 15 years of learning that, you know, control is fear-based. We need to control something we fear. It's the only way we're comfortable. So the question is, what are you afraid of? If you're afraid, if you've got ancient fears, hardwired fears from a abusive mom or something, whatever, it's in your best interest to just go take care of it. Start looking inward and saying, hey, where is all this anger, rage, and hatred coming from? I don't even know these people. When I said I was going to Hillary's talk here in St. Pete, I had to delete about 20 incredibly ugly posts. And all I said was, hey, I scored a ticket to the talk. You'd have thought, I can't tell you how ugly it was. These people don't know me, not really. They certainly don't know Hillary. What is behind their hatred? And some of them were women. And I marvel at it. I'm sorry, I just marvel at the intensity. And then I step back, I become a clinician, I say, okay, what's really going on here? And the only explanation is a complex. So I'm urging people who have these intense, strong feelings about things like this to really start looking at healing, because you're carrying that hatred around with you. It's poisoning you. Oh. Anyway, the misogynistic attacks are always about sexual imagery, appearance. It's always about a woman's physical appearance. Always. And you know who we're talking about now. The insults and threats directed at different women tend to be very similar. Sandy Doyle, who had been the target of online threats, noted that overwhelmingly impersonal, repetitive, stereotype quality of the abuse and threats. They were all the same thing, being called all the same names in all the same tone. We're talking hardwire. We're talking zombie land. Oh, I heard this, and it's just crazy. I feel myself going on a rant. I'm going to slow down. So, evolution theory. There was a study in 2015. The study found that women tend to experience hostile and sexist behavior in a male-dominated field by lower status men. In other words, he says, since male-dominated groups tend to be organized in hierarchies, the entry of women rearranged the hierarchy. Women are attracting higher status men. They want to attract higher. Now, this is evolution. This is Darwin. Women want to attract higher status men, have a better future for their children. This is, and the lower ranked men hate and resent them. So we have a whole basket of deplorable lower ranked people that hate the haves for whatever reason. I'm asking you to just look at the order, sociological order, and the closer we get to having this hierarchy where there's just a few haves and everybody else is a have-not, the more intense this is going to be. Okay, feminist theory. Subscribers to one model say that some misogyny results from the Madonna whore complex. Remember that? Which is the inability to see women as anything other than mothers or whores, nurturers, or somebody to use. People with this complex place each encounter with women in one of these two categories. Another variant model allows that one causes a misogyny as some men think in terms of the virgin whore dichotomy, which results in them considering as whores any women who do not adhere to the Abrahamic standard of moral purity. In other words, any women who won't let them touch them. In the late 20th century, second-wave feminist theorists argued that misogyny is both the cause and a result of patriarchal social structures. Sociologist Michael Flood has argued that misogyny lacks the systemic, transistorate, institutionalized, legitimate antipathy of misogyny. In other words, I can't even paraphrase that right now. You can just forget about it. But the criticism, Camille Paglia, whom I read a lot and followed a lot, she says that men do not hate women, but they fear them. There's all kinds of other quotes. But if you want to follow this, you can more. I mean, there were all these links. I could have, been online for 2 days. Honor killings, misogyny and mass media. We're going to be talking about that shortly, too. I don't know what time we've got. I've got another 25 minutes. I'm not going to take a break because I'm really wanting to get this, want to get all this information out to you, and you can, pick the ball up and do some of your own research. I'm going to move on to discrimination, which is a subcategory. By the way, misogyny is a core value, and it plays out in these different subcategories, and one of them is discrimination. It's an action that denies social participation or human rights to categories of people based on prejudice. This includes treatments of an individual group based on their actual or membership in a certain group or social category, restricting members of one group from opportunities or privileges that are available to another group, leading to the exclusion of the individual based on logical or irrational decision-making. In other words, when we got a patriarchy, when the first caveman clubbed a cave woman and dragged her away, and when the 150 BC, the first musings of misogyny, it says one group from opportunities or privilege that are available to another group. Well, guess what? Let's just go back to the women allowed to vote. To this day, hey guys, we're in 2016 and we still don't have equal pay. So don't tell me there's equality. Geez. Get a life, get an education, everyone. Anyway, women were not allowed to learn. They were not allowed to read. They were subjugated, oppressed, kept in line by either physical violence, isolation. There's many, many ways. Young girls weren't allowed to leave the house. Oh, it goes on and on. By the way, you want to look this up? I went to Wikipedia for all this. The category discrimination has 42 subcategories. 42. And I'm not going to read them, but I suggest you go there and you see, check it out. Sexism, stereotypes, racism, nepotism, discrimination, anti-this, anti-that, anti. There's even bias against left-handed people. Well, I can tell you that I'm left-handed. I knew about that. Clanism, discrimination based on color, race, creed. Well, it goes on and on and on. Hatred. Racial bias, racial politics, reverse discrimination, reverse racism, racial bias and crime. Oh. Anyway, moving right along. There are 12 types of repression. There's probably 100 types of repression if you want to nuance the whole thing. But let's just go with the 12. You can always research this yourself and, dig down into many, many, many more. So, sexism. Sexism has been a universal condition of civilization due to the fact that men tend to be larger and have more upper body strength than women. This brings with it the greater capacity for violence. Violence is the language of despotism, and we only slowly move beyond it. Despotism, I can't even pronounce it. Sexism tends to force women into subservient, restrictive roles that many women do not, and force men into dominant roles that many men do not want. It's very nuanced in terms of men having to, go along with a cultural perception. And by the way, hip-hop is all about that. So we're going to talk about that in a minute. There's heterosexism, which we understand, it's wanting to have sex with a member of the opposite sex. But then we have cisgenderism, cisgenderism. And this is a social pattern in which people who do not identify with their assigned gender roles or do not have clearly assigned gender roles are forced to either choose gender roles that do not suit them or suffer the social consequences. Cisgenderism. Okay, classicism is a social pattern where wealthy or influential people congregate with each other and oppress those who are less wealthy and less influential. Racism, social pattern in which people are identified of specific races are treated differently. Colorism, it's part of racism, but it's the added is the color of the skin. So colorism is a social pattern in which people are treated differently based not only on racism, but colorism, on the visible melatonin in their skin. It's not the same thing, but they often go together. It's not the same thing as racism, but they two tend to go together. Ableism. Ableism is a social pattern in which people are disabled. They're treated differently. Looksism. Looksism is a social pattern in which people whose faces and or bodies fit social ideals are treated differently from people whose faces and bodies do not. So, lookism, how you look. Sizeism, the same deal, what size you are. You're a victim of sizeism if your body doesn't fit social ideals and you're treated differently. Ageism, well, know what that is. Nativism. It's a social pattern in which people are born in a given country and are treated differently from those who immigrate to it. There's a lot here, isn't there? Nativism is a social pattern, colonialism, in which people are born in a given country are treated differently from those who immigrate to it, usually to the benefit of a specific group of powerful immigrants. Just go back to England, okay? So those are 12 types of repression. This is all online. I urge people, if you really want to learn and grow, to pay attention, learn. It's all there. You don't have to go to school. It doesn't cost you a dime. I'm going to go through this very fast. Misogyny in hip-hop culture. Common misogynistic themes include the use of derogatory names such as bitch and hoe, sexual objectification, legitimate violence against women, distrust of women, and the glorification of prostitute and pimping. Rappers are considered soft and fake if they distance themselves from hyper-masculine self-portrayals and hostile representation of women. There are pages and pages and pages on that. In the hip-hop culture, misogyny refers to lyrics, videos, and other aspects of hip-hop culture that support, glorify, justify, or normalize the objectification, exploitation, or victimization of women. It can range from innuendos to stereotypical characterizations and defamations. Research reveals that hip-hop around the world is notorious for misogyny, gang violence, and sexism. There are arguments against this, however. Feminist bell hooks suggest that misogyny in a hip-hop culture is not a male black thing, but has its roots in a larger pattern of hostility towards women in American culture. The misogynist lyrics of gangster rap are hateful indeed, but they do not represent a new trend. They just differ fundamentally from the discourses about white men hating women. Not good at all. Misogynistic themes in rap. Derogatory naming and shaming of women, sexual objectification, legitimization of violence, distrust of women, celebration of prostituting and pimping, misogynistic songs that is typically women in general who are called derogatory names such as bitches, whores, or chickenheads. This is not strange to hip-hop. In an interview a few weeks ago, comic Chris Ross said misogyny is no stranger to pop music in America. Sexual objectification is the most common misogynistic theme. Dr. Drew, bitches ain't shit. Bitches ain't shit but whores and tricks. Well, I won't even read this. It's too disgusting. But it's a hip-hop lyric. So there's misogyny and hip-hop. Now let's go to Thelma and Louise, because we're running out of time. Thelma and Louise was a film in 1991. It was a first and I think only female road trip film. It won tons of awards. Now, I saw Thelma and Louise many times. I almost did a paper on it, but my theme in school was adolescent melodrama. So I did a paper on adolescent melodrama, and then later on when I got older, Thelma and Louise came along, and I really wanted to do a paper on it, but I wasn't in school at that time. Now, in case you haven't seen it, I urge you to see this. It's a seminal film. It's a cultural commentary. If I ever said, a lot of people, you just make a reference to the film, and everybody knows exactly what you're talking about. But the core of the film is this Harlan guy tries to rape tries to rape Thelma. And as the women walk away, he yells profanity at him. Louise pulls a gun on him and says, if you touch her, I'll kill you. Something like that. Thelma wants to go to the police, but Louise says no. Because Thelma was drunk and had been dancing with him. No one would believe her claim of attempted rape. This is these pivotal point in the film where they take their road trip. They're on the run from this point on. They transform. This is a film. This is truly a story of transformation. The key line in the story for me was Thelma says to Louise, I just can't go back. And it's an archetypal line. It's a symbolic line. It's not in that thing I read, but I remember the line very clearly because that's the transformational moment. What she means is I can't go back to being Daryl's wife. I can't go back to being the subjective female. It's all about her transformation. She says in one line in the film, I think I'm getting used to this when she's going to rob a bank or rob a convenience store or something. But she says, I just can't go back. Okay, let's see what else we can say about Thelma and Louise. There's a big debate. By the way, it was nominated for in 100 different categories around the world, and it won many, many of them, including, of course, the Academy Awards and all the Oscars it won. Okay, the film was an overwhelming success. Here we go. Feminism. Numerous critics and writers have remarked that the feminist overtones of Thelma and Louise are unfair to men. I honestly laughed when I read that. So we mustn't attack conventional patterns. The movie constitutes an attack on conventional patterns of male behavior towards women. We can't do that. And so there's criticism about the movie because it does that. The Screenwriter Academy Awards for Scott, Davis, Sarandon, the filmographer. It's nominated for all these different awards all over the world. It's considered one of 100 movies of classic films. It's in the episode The Magnificent Movie Moments. The music, of course, is wonderful. But Louise says, I just can't go back. And that's the transformation of nature of this film. And it addresses, and if you recall the truck driver, who they shoot his tires out, well, there you go. Okay, in the few minutes I have left, I want to talk about, I've got so many papers here. I want to talk about an artist. I hope I'm pronouncing her name right. She flies in the face of the idea that women were not great artists back in the day. This is back in, her name is Gentileschi. And she's claim to fame, unhappy claim to fame, is she was a victim of a rape. And she killed the rapist. So she was brought to trial. No, I'm sorry, she didn't kill the rapist. She accused him. I'm sorry. She accused him, was brought to trial in Rome in 1612. Ropes were wrapped around her fingers and pulled tight. The judge advised moderate use of this torture, for she was, after all, only 18. Across the court sat the man who had raped her, but nobody thought of torturing him. Defiantly, Gentileschi told him her thumbscrews were the wedding ring he'd promised. Again and again she repeated that the testimony about her rape was reliable. It is true, it is true, it is true, is it true? This author thinks Gentileschi was the greatest female artist of the Baroque age and one of the most brilliant followers of the incendiary artist Caravaggio. She's painted amazing paintings using biblical characters to enact her rape and her rape vengeance. According to many art critics, she deserves to be one of the most famous artists in the world. It's not because she was highly successful in an age where guilds and academies closed their doors to women. She also did what none of the others did. She devoted her art to her healing. She had a brutally damaging life. In the wild art world of Caravaggio's Rome, artists were rich, arrogant, and could do most anything they liked, as long as they stayed in the Pope's good books. She met him many times because he was a friend of her father's, Orazio, who was also a talented artist. There's a tremendous amount of, I'm going to spell her name if you want to look all this up and get more information, if this fascinates you as much as it did me. Gentileschi. The trial lasted 7 months and shocked Rome. It made her a celebrity in the worst possible way. There's still a complete court transcript on record, amazingly. When she fought back, she described how she fought back. She said, had I been able to, I would have killed him. The man that raped her was also known to have murdered his wife, and he could offer no good defense. Yet she was tortured and he was set free. Why? He was protected by the Pope because his art, forgotten today, was rated at the time. Everybody knew he was a villain. Tassi's the only one of these artists who had never disappointed me, said Pope Innocent X. So she's a teenager when the trial ends. She's ashamed in a culture where honor was everything. But she offered a window into, well, for people like us, an opportunity to see, how deep this abuse and subjugation and oppression and prejudice against women was. And the only way, it says here, she revealed she could not write. She was not, back then women couldn't write. It's amazing. So she was more or less illiterate, but she could paint. She could paint beautifully. In her painting of Judith, she used Judith and Holofernes, these two subjects in a painting that are really her and her rapist. In most paintings, including Caravaggio's hallucinatory renderings, Judith has a servant who waits to collect the severed head. But unless she makes the servant a strong young woman who actively participates in the killing. This does two things. It adds a savage realism that it would take two women to kill a brute, but it also gives the scene a revolutionary implication. What wonders, Geneleshi, if women got together, could we fight back against a world ruled by men? That's it. That's my show. I'm shocked, amazed, appalled that Donald Trump is still the nominee of the Republican Party. You fools, you fools, you fools. Anyway, thank you for listening. I hope you've learned something. I hope I've inspired you to go out and, learn more and seek out some of this information. I mean, we're talking about books. I had to read Jung's 26 volumes to become a Jungian. I mean, there's at least 1,000 volumes here on these subjects. But, and you women, don't be so quick to click like when you read a joke on Facebook at the expense of another woman. You women need to learn a little bit about yourselves and your own prejudices against other women. I think it'd be good for you to grow past that. So that's my advice. Take it or leave it. No mind to me, because I know who I am. And I hope someday, we can live in a world that will never be free of this, but at least it won't be so overwhelmingly where a misogynist and an outrageous predatory misogynist is this close to the White House. It's terrifying to me. Thank you for listening. This is Valvoline Harity. And thank you, Eric. And have a great day, everyone.
Let's talk about life. Let's have a real conversation. Let's talk about life. Better learn a little information. Let's talk about life. And let's talk about love. Let's talk about life. Let's have a real conversation. Let's talk about life. Maybe learn a little information. Let's talk about life. And let's talk about love.
Thank you for listening to Life Improvement Radio. The views expressed by show hosts or their guests are their own and shall not be construed in any way as advice from Life Improvement Radio. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our website. Personal perspectives expressed by the producers, writers, or editors will always be presented as such. Any rebroadcast or retransmission without the expressed written consent of Life Improvement Radio is strictly prohibited. Thanks for listening.